I've spent every week of 2024 learning about homebrewing beer, speaking with experts, running experiments, and testing equipment, and there's no question about it, it has changed how I brew. What has 2024 taught me about homebrewing? Allow me to explain. This episode is sponsored by Yakima Valley Hops. More on them in a bit. Hey, how's it going? My name's Martin Keane. Now, I have spent this whole year, 2024, doing homebrew stuff every single week. One constant is every time I speak to my buddy John Palmer, I get a bit smarter. And this first thing comes from one of those conversations, and that is that cold crashing speed matters.
Cooling rate and thermal shock can have an effect on yeast. And it's been my understanding that the thermal shock, the rapid cooling of yeast, can cause them to excrete protective lipids from inside the yeast cell, and that those lipids can then affect the head retention of the beer. So these essentially act as wetting agents and help collapse foam. So I wanted to check this theory and how big of an effect does cooling rate have on head retention.
Now, how I normally cold crash is just as quickly as possible. I set my glycol system to the lowest temperature I can get it at and then let it go. And it will get down to that temperature within a few hours. But the idea of a slow cold crashing is to do this at 3 degrees Celsius every 12 hours. So it looks like I've got a new 8 o'clock routine. It's 8 a.m. the next day now. I'm actually brewing a beer, but I'm also going to be dropping the temperature another 3 degrees. So I ran an experiment where I did my typical fast cold crash with this slower gradual cold crash. And looking at the beers, well, the head retention, it was actually pretty similar initially. They both retained a good amount of foam. But the one thing I did notice different was that the cold crash beer was noticeably brighter. And that kind of makes sense. There's less yeast stress going on here. Now, I was chatting with John about this for a good while. In fact, I think we were on the call for about an hour. And I noticed that there was actually still a good amount of head retention in the beer 1 hour later, the one that was cold crashed slowly.
This is over an hour.
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
I mean,
look at a fresh head and looks great.
Now, since doing this experiment, this has been my go-to is to cold crash slowly, and I've seen some phenomenal head retention, so I am all for slow, gradual cold crashes from now on. Right, the second one, this is a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to show you it anyway. The basic idea, it came from Key at Kegland, which is that you can use a soda bottle to replace your CO2 tank. I want to put some CO2 into here and then pump out some liquid from a keg and see how much liquid I can get out from just one of these little bottles. Now I need some kind of regulator because there's 3 bar of pressure here. That's way more than I need for serving pressure. And that is this guy here. So this is a spunding valve. And what I can do is I can set the amount of pressure that comes in here by turning this dial, and then that will regulate how much pressure comes out the other end, and this will go into my keg. So I've got my CO2 tank connected into my keg. Coming out of my keg, I have my beer gun. Let's take this flask and see how much of the liquid this is going to displace with the CO2. What do you think? Do you think we're going to get like 1 liter? We're coming through at a pretty good rate. I've set my dispensing pressure to about 10 psi on here, and I can see now that the pressure is starting to drop. So we're already kind of running out of pressure. So a little bit less than 1.5 liters, a pretty good amount. So with that little Coke bottle, it kind of worked. It was a proof of concept, but you can't get an awful lot of CO2 in that. So I tried again using a 2-liter bottle, and that 2-liter bottle had 4 bar of pressure. I've kicked the keg. There you go. 4 liters of water. So it worked. Yeah, it worked. Kinda. I was actually doing this quite wrong because I'm using a spunding valve for this. And just think about it. What does a spunding valve do? It relieves pressure to a certain amount. So if you set your spunding valve to, let's say, 10 psi, it will relieve all but 10 psi in your vessel. I want the exact opposite of that. I want it to dispense, say, 10 psi out. And that is the wrong tool. I should, in fact, have been using a regulator instead of a spunding valve. So if you are going to give this a try, make sure you use the right tool. Make sure you use a regulator and not a spunding valve to do this. Lesson learned. All right, I've got some more to tell you about, 3 more in fact. But before we get to those, a quick word about today's sponsor, and that's Yakima Valley Hops. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. I'm using Yakima Valley hops in every batch I brew, capturing everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic and many, many more. Homebrewers can select specific crop years, and most hops come in 2, 8, and 16-ounce packages, and I personally love using the 8-ounce bags, which gives me plenty of hops for a brew day, and I can store any leftovers in my freezer. Head over to yakimavalleyhops.com to see everything they have to offer. Okay, another experiment I wanted to tell you about. Well, actually a series of experiments, and they all relate to IBU, and that is to say that the calculated IBU that you get in brewing software turns out to be very different from the actual IBU that you get in your beer. Now, as homebrewers, we often don't really know what the IBU is. It's not like gravity and ABV and something that we can easily measure at home. But I have had the fortune of being able to send some of my beers to labs to be tested. White Labs in particular have received a couple of my beers. Now, I started with a German Heller's export beer, and I sent that beer to White Labs for analysis. Brewfather estimated an IBU of 24, but the lab reported IBU scores were of just 7 and 9. Wow. The BJCP guidelines for a German Heller's export beer specify an IBU range of 20 to 30, so my beers were well off. So that is a massive difference, and it wasn't a one-off because I got to send another beer to White Labs, this time a hoppy blonde. Now this time we were looking at 40 IBU. That was my expected IBU. What did we actually get with the 2 beers?
For the 2 beers, I believe for the Lupo Max, we got 25 IBU. And then for the lower alpha acid one, we were able to get 21.5 IBU.
So yeah, it was off again, not by as much, but it's still a significant amount. So that's something I've learned this year, is you can't really trust these IBU calculations. All right, somebody you can trust, that would be Alex Shanksable, the cheapskate brewer.
Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm a cheapskate brewer.
Now, Alex has a bunch of cool ways of saving money and making brewing more convenient. One of my favorites is the Shank tank, which is effectively a way to make your own CO2.
All you need to do is take a empty keg and add a sugar water solution. It can be as low as just 10-20 OG, and add something like champagne yeast to the sugar water solution, slap on a spunding valve, and hold it to something like 30 psi, and you can use it for something like purging your tanks, doing transfers, and so on.
So the sugar water ferments, creating CO2, which is stored in the keg. And I asked Alex how to build one.
Yeah, what I'll actually do is tear out the liquid line from the tank so that I effectively have 2 gas posts on the corny keg, and then put a spunding valve on one of them, and then the other one I can put a quick disconnect on. I do spunding so it doesn't get too wild. Sometimes I do 30 if it's just going to be a really quick, I need it the next day kind of thing. But if it's sitting around a while, I usually do 60 psi.
Right, next one. This, pH meters. I have a pH meter here that has something called ATC. That stands for Automatic Temperature Correction. What I thought that meant is that I could measure my wort at any temperature And then the smarts in here, the ATC, would actually give me the correct pH, and I could just go from there. So if I'm targeting a pH of 5.2 to 5.6 in the mash, well, I would just take a measurement no matter what the temperature, and I would expect to get the right pH reading. That's not right.
ATC is a very handy-dandy function that keeps the pH meter calibrated for you. So when you come into the lab in the morning or into your brewery and you calibrate your pH meter, you stick it in the pH 4 solution at room temperature, you stick it in the pH 7 buffer solution at room temperature, that pH meter is now calibrated at room temperature for room temperature solutions. If you measure a sample that's at a different temperature, the electrode in the pH meter that's calibrated at room is going to have a different response due to that change in temperature. And so what ATC does is it recognizes that difference in temperature from calibration to your new sample and says, okay, if I'm calibrated at 70, but this work sample is at 95, the actual pH of this sample at 95 degrees is this, which is going to be a little bit lower due to the negative log of the scale. It's going to be a little bit lower at a higher temperature than it is at room temperature. And that's why when we talk about the pH range at room 5.2 to 5.6, we're trying to measure, at mash temperature, it's about 0.3 lower because of that change in temperature. So 5.2 to 5.6 measured at mash temperature would be 4.9 to 5.3 roughly, that same range. But again, we're supposed to be cooling the sample down to room, measuring it there, and that's where we're looking for 5.2 to 5.6.
So now I know, chili wort to room temperature, take the reading then. Look, thank you for everybody who's helped me out this year, trying to improve my brewing a little bit and be able to share some of that with you on the channel. And a huge thank you for everybody who's watched the Brülosophy show this year. It has been a pleasure. Every time I post a video on a Thursday, just seeing all of the comments of people talking about their own experiences of stuff. And really, that's also where I've learned a ton as well, is from the comments section of these videos. We have a whole bunch of cool stuff coming in 2025, so stick around for that. But yeah, thank you so much for watching the episodes this year, and I'll see you on the next one.